Scary things caught on camera that you weren't meant to see. Jenna and Jesse are two hosts of a well-liked YouTube channel. One day, they both decide, along with a close friend, to explore an abandoned prison, but what they find will shock you. At about 11.5 minutes into the video, a shadowy figure appears behind Jesse. Take a look.
To see if he did. So just so you know. And we did a seance.
It echoes so...
This is already creepy, but what would make it creepier is that this could be the shadow of a real person, even though the prison is abandoned. Let me know what you think in the comments and follow so you don't miss more stories.
These are serial killers who need shows, part 1. Up first is Dennis Rader, also known as the BTK Killer. And between 1974 and 1991, he killed 10 people in Wichita and Park City, Kansas. He also sent taunting letters to the police and media news outlets, bragging and explaining his crimes in detail. But after taking a decade off of killing, Dennis Rader wanted to resume, so he began sending letters again to the police, saying the BTK Killer is back, which ultimately led to him getting arrested. But what makes the BTK Killer so weird is that he tied himself up and did the same things to himself that he would do to his victims, because he liked it that much. I know the series Mindhunters covered the BTK Killer, but it wasn't his own standalone show. I think he's an extremely interesting individual that people would find disturbing and fascinating.
Disturbing facts that will ruin your life. You can be declared dead in some states but considered alive in others. That's because New York and New Jersey allow families to reject the concept of brain death if it goes against their religious beliefs. One of the first visible signs of death is when the eyes cloud over, as fluid and oxygen stop flowing to the corneas. That can happen within 10 minutes after death if the eyes were open. Today, there are about 300 bodies frozen in liquid nitrogen in America in the hope that science will one day be able to bring them back to life. It's a myth that hair and nails grow after death. What really happens is that the body dries out, so the nail beds and skin on the head retract, making nails, stubble, and hair appear longer. Rigor mortis is only temporary. It's a result of certain fibers in the muscle cells becoming linked by chemical bonds, but usually goes away in a day or two as those bonds break down. How long it lasts depends on the temperature in the environment, among other factors.
Disturbing things caught in elevators. It's always best to let machines work as intended. These kids, who live in the building, likely didn't expect to be in a living nightmare. While goofing around on the elevator, the little boy in the video pressed his foot into the door of the elevator. Suddenly, without warning, the door buckles. There were no known issues with the elevator. This simply was an out-of-left-field occurrence. The building tried to sue for compensation, whereas the child's parents claimed they should be grateful. If all it took was a little pressure from a kid for this much damage to occur, imagine if things had gone just a little bit worse.
These are dark web stories that you were never supposed to know, but I'm telling you about them anyways. Oh yeah, viewer discretion is advised. So this is the story known as the human experiment. The dark web holds some of the most gut-wrenching, abnormal things that you have ever seen and will ever see. One of those being human experiments. Basically, it's like this. A bunch of dark web workers on a website claim that they have multiple locations all across the world where people can just go and commit horrific acts on people that they have kidnapped. Now, the website actually has some pretty crazy story descriptions as to what their customers have actually done, with things like injecting pregnant women with bleach, starvation, and even beating and torturing people endlessly. The website even claims that their experiments are strictly done on homeless people, and that is it, and strictly for experimental purposes only. But like that makes this situation any better. In fact, it is even more terrifying that they're out looking for people on the daily. If you want to hear more stories like this, leave a like and follow, and tell me what you thought.
These are 8 horrifying facts that will probably keep you up at night. There's a 1 in 3 chance police will never identify your killer if you were murdered in the United States. If the sun exploded now, you wouldn't know about it for another 8 minutes. 20% of children report hearing voices. There are 40 supervolcanoes around the world capable of claiming 1 billion lives. And we are about 24,000 years overdue for an eruption. The air you breathe in train stations is 15% human skin. There are over 200 dead bodies on top of Mount Everest, because retrieving them is such a risk. They serve as markers for other hikers. When you die, your house cat is going to want to eat you. Speaking of pets, dogs like squeaky toys because they mimic the screams of their prey. Yeah, there's a lot more, like for part 2.
Scary things caught on camera. Bailey is a TikTok user who works in a so-called haunted theater. As the story goes, the owner of the theater apparently died 30 years ago in a tragic accident and still haunts his theater to this day. One night when Bailey is alone in his job, he finds something terrifying. Take a look.
Alright guys, so I work at this old theater and I've been hearing a noise. What is that?
Follow if you saw anything.
This is the scary story about the broken down car. There was a man named Alex who never got an Uber before. He didn't trust them and was honestly scared of strangers. But one day his car broke down, and in a last resort he called an Uber. When the Uber got there, it was an old elderly man. Alex then got in the car and said hello. The man then said, "If you're thirsty, I have some water bottles back there." Alex was super thirsty and immediately drank the whole bottle. But seconds later, he passed out. When Alex woke up, he found himself in a small creepy room with both of his hands chained to the wall and his left leg cut off. Alex then began screaming hysterically, and suddenly the old man came into the room and said, "You better get used to this place, my friend, because you're going to die here."
Blood-curdling facts that you wish you never knew, Part 20. During World War II, Disney released their own version of the gas mask, designed to make them less creepy for children. In 2014, after losing her 5-day-old baby boy, a mother attached a gravestone to a sandbox so her older son could play with him. The CPR doll's face that we use today is actually from a 19th century drowned woman's face. There's a forbidden island off the coast of Brazil called Snake Island that's home to more than 2,000 deadly golden lancehead snakes. Starfish actually have hundreds of tiny little feet and are able to walk on land, but it looks absolutely horrifying. A man by the name of Timothy Clark Smith was so fearful that he was going to be buried alive that he had his own gravesite customized so he could have a window where his face was and also have a rope attached to a bell so he could ring it to alert people that he was alive.
The story of Jeffrey Dahmer. He was an American serial killer and sex offender. Was born on May 21, 1960. Between the years of 1978 and 1991, Dahmer murdered 17 males. His first kill was at the age of 18, while home alone during the summer. He hit him over the head, then dissected, dissolved and scattered remains throughout his backyard. 9 years later, he started to lure men from bars or solicited prostitutes. He would drug, raped, and strangled. Dahmer began to use the bodies for intercourse, taking photographs of the dismemberment process, preserving his victims' skulls and genitals for display, and retaining parts for consumption. He was arrested for an incident at his job, where he drugged and sexually fondled a 13-year-old boy. He was sentenced to 5 years probation, 1 year at a work release camp, and was required to register as a sex offender. Dahmer began killing around one person each week by the summer of 1991. A lobotomized victim even made it out onto the street to ask for help. When Dahmer returned, he convinced the police that the man was his intoxicated boyfriend. He became obsessed with the idea that he could turn his victims into zombies to act as youthful and submissive sexual partners. Dahmer was finally caught when one of his victims was able to get free and escape out into the streets, where he found police and told them Dahmer had a knife. During an investigation of the home, they found a severed head in the refrigerator, 3 more severed heads throughout the apartment, multiple photographs. He was sentenced to 15 life terms, for a total of 957 years in prison, and was killed while in prison by other inmates.
I had never heard of this before, so I want to know, have you guys heard of the true story of Midnight Mary? On October 15th of 1872, Mary Hart suddenly just dropped dead. Now, what's specific to this story was that she was pronounced gone at exactly midnight, and they buried her in the Evergreen Cemetery located in New Haven, Connecticut. Something was very wrong. All of her relatives had these extreme nightmares where they would hear Mary screaming as if they could hear it from underground. These nightmares actually became so bad for the family that they exhumed the body, which is when they found the most shocking part of the story: scratch marks from inside her casket. She had accidentally been buried alive. So the legend has it that she continues to roam the grounds of this cemetery in hatred of the world that falsely buried her when she was still living. Those who speak her name or even hear of the story seem to summon her, and if you're ever at her grave beyond midnight, the legend has it that you'll die very soon after.
These are some extremely unsettling facts, and I found all these on Reddit. One day a woman woke up with a really piercing headache. She thought it was just a normal one though, so she just tried to push through the day. But it only got worse and worse, to the point where she couldn't bear it anymore and she went to the hospital. She would check it out and her worst nightmare would come true. She had a brain tumor, so they removed the tumor, and what they found was really disturbing. This tumor had hair, skin, and teeth. The case of little Albert is one of the saddest cases I know of. Essentially, scientist John Watson wanted to find out if fear was something that you're born with or if it's something that is learned over time. John was also a teacher at a university that had a childcare center. Do you get where I'm going with this? Every single day, John would abduct the same boy, and his name was Albert. So every day around the same time, Albert's mom would drop him off, and then John Watson would go and take him and conduct some terrible tests on him. The main test that had the longest lasting effect though was that John would give little Albert a tiny little white stuffed animal. Albert would love this stuffed animal until John would go behind him with a gong and bang it with a hammer. Obviously this would terrify the baby, and Albert would correlate that really loud noise with this white stuffed animal. Thankfully though, one day Albert's mom would find out what was going on. She would take Albert and they would move away. But unfortunately, the damage was already done. Albert adopted a deep fear of anything that was white and loud noises. On top of that, unfortunately, Albert never learned how to walk or talk, and he would die at the age of 6. And many people believe that this is all because of John Watson's testing. Obviously, that's a very dark one, but it makes sense for today's video because
grab yourself a blankie and a snack because this story is terrifying. This is Friday night. It was a Friday evening and Mia was gonna stay in as her roommate Lucy was going out with a few college friends grabbing some drinks. The two were good friends and had lived together for about a year. Lucy said she wouldn't be back until later and not to wait up. Mia was white from her work week, so she got in bed around 11 p.m. and quickly fell asleep. 20 or so minutes later, she woke up to the sound of someone walking up and down the hallway by her bedroom door. She figured Lucy must have gotten home. She flipped over and went back to sleep. A few minutes later, she heard her bedroom door slowly open. Lucy had borrowed an outfit for a night out, and half asleep Mia just assumed that she was returning it. It was dark, but she looked up to make out the figure of someone standing in the doorway. She rolled over and was going to say something to Lucy, but the person backed out and closed the door. Trying to fall back asleep again, she then heard Lucy making a ton of noise in the family room. She was annoyed, but too tired to get up. So she leaned over, grabbed her phone, and texted Lucy, "Hey, can you keep it down in there? I'm trying to sleep." A minute later, Mia's phone buzzed. It was Lucy, and her message read, "What are you talking about? I'm still out with friends, won't be back for another hour." Whoever was in the family room wasn't Lucy. Someone was in the apartment. Mia's stomach dropped as she could still hear the person walking around the family room. She jumped up, ran to her bedroom door, and locked it as she dialed 911. The sound of the sirens must have run the intruder off because when police got to the apartment, no one was there. Police found a front window partially open and figured that's how the intruder must have gotten in. And that intruder, who came within feet of Mia as they stood in her doorway, was never identified. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Lock your doors, lock your windows, get an alarm system, and get a dog.
Have you ever seen the news broadcast that will play when the world's ending?
What?
Okay, so back in 1980, when CNN was created, the founder of CNN said that CNN will never stop broadcasting, and if they do, it will be because the world is ending.
That's not scary at all.
Yeah, so what he did was he created a broadcast that will only play if the world's ending. And on that broadcast, it's a video of a band playing the song Near My God to Thee, which is literally the same song that was played on the Titanic before it sank, according to all the survivors of the Titanic. This wasn't even supposed to be leaked. It was leaked by CNN. They were supposed to keep this to themselves.
These are some extremely unsettling facts, and I found all of these on Reddit. Number 1, CPR. Did you know that the CPR dummy's face is actually based off of a 16-year-old dead girl? The girl who this was based off of had her body pulled out of the Seine River in 1880, and the cause of her death was never discovered. And the mortician who got her body was so entranced by how peaceful her face was that he decided to make this the international copy that you would use for a dummy in CPR training. Number 2, dirty ice. Now, we've all been to a restaurant before. You sit down at the table and one of the first things that a waiter will ask you is, do you want something to drink? But if I were you, next time you get a drink, ask for it without any ice. Because according to an HVAC technician, restaurants do not take as good of care of their ice machines as they need to. You see, ice machines need to be taken apart and sanitized once every couple months, but many restaurants don't even do that. This leads to a majority of restaurants having machines filled with mold so thick they can pull it out with their hands. So think about that the next time you go to a restaurant. And finally, take care of the elderly. One of the most common injuries that older people will get is a broken hip. This is very normal, it happens pretty often, but this next fact I'm about to tell you, I need you to know so you can take care of your grandparents. 1/3 of people who break their hip will die within the next year afterwards. It could be as simple as them having a broken hip, recovering, and then falling again, breaking that hip one more time, and having no way to reach anyone afterwards. So all I can really say about this is make sure you check up on your grandparents, especially if they go through a hip injury, and just keep them safe. And look, I know a lot of these are hard to hear and could have a lot of dark repercussions on your life, but that's why.
A farmer had a daughter who he loved more than anything in the world. She fell in love with a farmhand named Jim. But the farmer didn't think that Jim was good enough for his daughter, so in an attempt to keep them apart, he sent his daughter to live with her uncle on the other side of the county. Soon after she left, Jim got very sick, and unfortunately, he wasted away and died. Everyone said that he must have died from a broken heart. The farmer felt so guilty about Jim's death that he couldn't bear to tell his daughter what happened. So she continued to hope that someday her and Jim might have the chance to be together. One night, many weeks later, there was a knock on her uncle's door. When the girl answered it, Jim was standing there. He told her, "Your father asked me to come get you, and I came on his best horse." Not knowing what was wrong, she jumped on the back of his horse and they rode away together. Soon into their ride, Jim began complaining of a headache. The girl put her hand on his forehead and said, "Jim, you're cold as clay. I hope you're not getting sick." She then wrapped her handkerchief around his head. Within a few hours, they had reached the farm. The girl quickly jumped off the horse and knocked on her father's door. But her father was surprised to see her. "Didn't you send for me?" she asked. And he said, "No, I didn't." The girl turned to Jim, but he was gone, and so was the horse. And when they went to the stable to look for them, they found the horse there covered with sweat and trembling with fear, but Jim was nowhere to be found. Terrified, her father told her the truth about Jim's death. They quickly went to see Jim's parents and decided to open his grave. There, his corpse lay in his coffin, but around his head, they found the girl's handkerchief.
This story tells of a young man who got lost in the wood. Accidentally, he found a cave that looked strange. He decided to check the cave, and how surprised he was when he found a woman lying with cobwebs wrapped around her feet. Without thinking, he quickly saved the woman. The man immediately carried the poor woman out of the cave. After going far enough from the cave, he was exhausted until he fell asleep. That's when the woman woke up to see a ladybug that landed on the man's face. Surprisingly, she could feel the hunger as if she was about to eat the ladybug. Unexpectedly, the man woke up and realized that the woman in front of him was not a human but a spider woman. Now his legs were even wrapped in cobwebs. He tried to push the woman away until he noticed a news item in the newspaper that mentioned a virus outbreak caused by a giant spider. Now the young man realized that he would turn into a Spider-Man. But unexpectedly, the two fell in love and gave birth to cute and funny children. The family is now living happily.